The following story occurred in the summer of 2005. I lived in Athens, Georgia, and attended the University of Georgia. At the time, my girlfriend, now wife, lived in Atlanta, which was about a 65-mile drive from my hometown. The highway which takes you to Atlanta from Athens is a 2-lane highway called 316. This is important information for the story. It was a Sunday evening. I had spent the weekend in Atlanta and was now driving back to Athens. In the summer, there are very few cars on the road on Sunday evenings, as many of the students go home for the summer. I was driving a black BMW SUV and was cruising along listening to music. I saw no cars for miles and was approaching a traffic light along 316. The traffic light was red, and I came to a stop alongside an old Mustang. It looked like one of those models from the 1980s, was black in color with a rag top. The windows of the vehicle were tinted. I didn't really give the car a second thought. I just sat there and waited for the light to turn green. When it did, the Mustang suddenly sped off with a squeal of the tires. As if the driver floored it from the idle position, the car sped off far in front of me. I was a bit surprised, but I just thought, another redneck, who cares? The Mustang was soon out of sight and out of mind. I continue driving along, and I'm back in chill mode again, when suddenly, a car with its high beams on appears directly behind me. What the hell? I quickly realized it was the same Mustang from before. They had been waiting alongside the highway for me. I nervously looked down to make sure my phone was still charging, just in case I needed it. It was. The Mustang switches lanes and flies up beside me, keeping pace for a few seconds. The driver then swerves in front of me, then suddenly brakes, bringing the car to a halt. I swerve into the other lane. The Mustang quickly speeds up beside me and starts swerving, trying to knock me off the road. They charge ahead again and try the same braking maneuver once more. At this point, I am freaking out. Now, I'm a 6'3", 220-pound male who works out all the time. I don't easily get scared, but in this situation, size did not matter. I note the license plate on the car and grab my phone. But as I do, the Mustang is suddenly beside me again and begins swerving. I jerk my wheel to the side, and my phone goes flying out of my hands into the passenger side door well. Shit! The Mustang is then behind me, flashing its brights, right on my bumper, speeding up, slowing down, blaring its horn, swerving from side to side. They suddenly take off and are soon out of sight. I take the opportunity to collect myself and drive the remaining 10 minutes to the turnoff road to Athens. I make a quick decision to drive to the police station to file a report. I had the license plate number memorized and had been reciting it over and over again. As I turn off the road to Athens, bright headlights fill my rearview mirror again, and the Mustang is behind me. It speeds past me, turns down another road, and is gone. I arrived at the police station and give them the license plate number. It's a fairly small station, and I think there was only one officer working. He tells me that it's probably somebody mistaking me for somebody else. He runs the plate number and tells me the owner of those tags is deceased. Holy shit. Now I'm really freaked out. I finish filing the report and head home. The story doesn't end there. Later that night, when I was on the phone with my girlfriend, someone outside beats loudly on my garage door several times. Before I could get out to see who it was, I heard a squeal of tires. I never saw a car, but I called the cops immediately, and there has never been any kind of follow-up. I didn't sleep for several nights after that. I'm 21 years old. This happened to me shortly after I turned 18, and graduated high school. My family moved to a new house in Texas. My mother claimed that it was so we could get a fresh start, but I knew the truth. She was ashamed of all the trouble that my sister Jocelyn had gotten into in our hometown. Weeks later, after we settled into the new house, Jocelyn disappeared. My mother received a phone call from my sister's parole officer. Apparently they found her in Atlanta. And to make a long story short, Jocelyn wasn't thrilled about the move, so she ran away to a friend's house. Unfortunately, I couldn't fly back to Georgia with my mom, and I had no choice but to stay in Texas. The next morning after my mom left, I went for a jog around the new neighborhood to familiarize myself. It was when I stopped to catch my breath and change playlists on my phone that I felt a cold feeling creep up my spine. It was the unmistakable sensation that you get when you're being watched. I looked around, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. But I knew that someone was watching me from somewhere close by. I decided to cut my walk short. As soon as I reached my house, I locked the doors and immediately ran upstairs to take a quick shower. While I was washing up, I heard a faint thud from downstairs. I quickly turned off the shower and listened. Another thud followed. I quickly threw on my clothes and ran downstairs to check things out, but there was nothing. The front and patio doors were locked, so I was left feeling a little confused. Trying my best to keep my composure, I was finally able to breathe when my mom called to check up on me. I didn't want my mom to be worried about me. She was already stressing out enough because of the situation with my sister, so I told her that I was fine and that I was going to order takeout and chill for the rest of the day. Later that night, around 10 p.m., I finished up my dinner while binge watching How to Get Away with Murder on Netflix and eventually fell asleep on the couch. I suddenly woke up a couple of hours later. It was around 1 a.m., and the room was freezing. The thermostat showed 42 degrees. That's when that dreadful feeling came back. I felt like a deer being eyeballed by an apex predator. Danger was close by. My stomach felt like I was doing somersaults. Something was very wrong, and that's when I noticed that my phone was missing. After a brief search on the couch, I couldn't find it. Annoyed, I decided to use a website called Text Now on my laptop. It's a free online service that I sometimes use to track my misplaced phone. Trembling, I typed in my number. Almost immediately, the ringtone abruptly stopped, and that's when I heard heavy breathing coming from the other end. I barely had enough time to respond when I heard a knocking on the glass of the patio doors. I grabbed an unscrewed bedpost from the closet before checking things out. When I looked out through the doors, my heart stopped. Holding my phone was a dark figure in a goat mask. Before I can make out any other details, the masked man slid my patio door open. At the speed of light, I burst through the front doors and headed for my neighbor's house across the street. There, I banged on the door until an older woman came to greet me. She immediately called the police after I explained everything to her. The cops arrived 10 minutes later, and after a thorough search of my house, they found no trace of the intruder. After that ordeal, there was no way I was staying in that house alone, so I asked the officers if I could accompany them to the station, to which they obliged. While I was at the station, one of the officers informed me that they had located my phone outside the house. However, since there were no fingerprints on it, added to the fact that I couldn't give a detailed description of the assailant, it was a dead end. There was one last unpleasant surprise when I unlocked my phone to call my mom. Upon seeing what was in my photo gallery, my blood ran cold. The officer saw that I was uneasy and asked me what was wrong. I handed him the phone. There was about 15 videos of me sleeping on the couch, each nearly 3 minutes long. The masked man that I saw had been inside my house and was watching me while I was sleeping. I felt so violated that I became nauseous and called my mom and told her everything. Hours later, she and my sister came straight from the airport to come get me. We didn't live in that house much longer after that. For the longest time, I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if I had woken up with that man standing over me. Perhaps I wouldn't be here to tell you this story. It took a while, but I finally came to terms with what happened. But I would be lying if I told you that this experience doesn't haunt me to this day. This story took place during my early childhood, so I'll share events that I can recall. It's mostly bits and pieces. There are some things that I can remember in great detail, and some that I can only vaguely recall. So I'll do my best to try to piece things together without getting off track. I have two sisters. I'm the middle child. They also remember a good majority of this as well. This happened back in mid-2003, and I was 5 years old back then. My two sisters were about 4 and 7, so my parents hired a babysitter. Her name was Julie. She had been friends with my mom in high school. She actually lived with us for a while. All I really remember about her was that she was very tall, skinny, and had dark blonde hair that was always tied up. We lived in an apartment complex at the time. It was a place called Oats Creek. So Julie babysat us while my parents worked. She even ended up dating one of my dad's co-workers, which brought a few jokes at my dad's job about him being a pimp. Basically, she became a family friend. Not long after that is when Julie started to change. She started getting very impatient and rude, and even straight up abusive to us, mostly targeting my sisters. My older sister once told me that she thinks that Julie possibly tried to kill her, and in response she grabbed a bottle with green liquid inside of it and tried to force her to drink it. She didn't know what this substance was, and she couldn't get into great detail about the incident itself. I guess her memory isn't as good as mine. Julie would get physically violent with us over the stupidest reasons, such as accidentally knocking something over or spilling a drink. We were just kids. Of course, she only did this when my parents were at work. That was until our family cat attacked her. Julie closed the door with my little sister's hand still in the doorway. It was an accident, or at least I think it was. This, of course, hurt my little sister, who started crying in pain. That's when our cat jumped onto Julie's leg and latched on with her back claws. She was biting and swatting at her, with her tail puffed out, hissing and everything. Basically, she snapped. My parents were a bit surprised, as our cat wouldn't even hurt a fly. It was around this time that they started to suspect that Julie was a bit of a whack job. She still continued to watch after us while my parents worked. This is where my memory gets a little hazy, as if my mind is trying to block something out. There was one occurrence that I still remember to this day, 18 years after the fact. In our room, my older sister had her own twin-sized bed. Me and my little sister shared a bunk bed on the other side of the room, and I slept on the top bunk. Anyway, one night, my little sister woke me up because she couldn't sleep. So she climbed up on the top bunk and we started talking quietly. After a while, she said, "Hey, watch this. I can hang off the edge without falling." However, she slipped and fell to the ground, and I started screaming and crying. That's when Julie storms into the room, yelling and cursing, and spanked my sister with one of my dad's belts. She then picks her up and throws her onto the bottom bunk, and screams for her to go back to sleep, and then storms out, slamming the door behind her. Julie was so enraged that she didn't even see me watching her. I was frozen, completely in shock. I didn't know what to do. I can only remember one time clearly where Julie physically struck me. As I said earlier, she mainly went after my two sisters. I can't remember the exact details, and she smacked me across the face. I don't remember why I did it, probably because she was yelling at us about something stupid, which was usual. She told my parents, and then my dad asked her, "Well, what did you do to set him off?" She then got pissy with him and said, "He was just a disrespectful little sh." Eventually, not long after that, Julie went away for good, moved on elsewhere. When she was finally gone, that's when me and my sisters came clean to my parents about everything. Julie struck us several times and yelled at us constantly. My parents can't really remember most of these events, as their memories aren't that great either. But I'm pretty sure they felt absolutely terrible for us, having to go through all this. We never saw or heard from Julie again. I don't know if my parents ever confronted her about anything, but they definitely cut her out of our lives for good. They never contacted the police as there wasn't really any proof of abuse. Everything was all hearsay. Neither of my parents ever caught her actually doing anything. I wish they would have. I'm not sure why my sisters or myself never said anything sooner, like when Julie wasn't around. I'm pretty sure she made threats to us if we did, and perhaps we can't remember. Years later we found out that Julie had been arrested and served time in jail. Unfortunately, we never found out the exact reason why. Sometimes we all still talk about these events, and I know that I'll remember this for the rest of my life. So yeah, that's my abusive babysitter story. Julie, burn in hell. This happened during my junior year of college. For context, I'm a 22-year-old female. I was driving from my hometown in the Chicago suburbs to the University of Missouri, which is about a 6-hour drive. I made this drive about every 4 to 6 weeks to see my family and my long-distance boyfriend. There were two main ways to take to the town that my university was in. Stay on the interstate system throughout central Illinois and to St. Louis, or branch out on back roads after Springfield, Illinois, until picking the interstate back up about 30 minutes from my college. I usually took the back road simply because it kept me awake with the constant speed limit changes and the occasional towns that I would have to go through. But on this particular time, I took the interstate system all the way there because there was high potential for winter weather. So I was minding my own business, listening to one true crime podcast after another, when about an hour from my exit, traffic came to a standstill. Great, I thought. It was already way beyond dark at this point. It was also a Sunday night, and I just wanted to get home to catch a decent night's sleep before my Monday classes. After a while, emergency vehicles flew past the traffic on the shoulder, indicating that there must be some kind of accident up ahead. After what felt like forever, traffic slowly started crawling again, and eventually picked up pace as soon as we all passed the accident. That's when it started. I will admit that I do like to drive fast on the interstate, especially on this particular drive. What college kid doesn't? I was in the right lane with a decent amount of space between me and the car in front of me, and that's when I noticed someone right on my bumper. Seriously? I muttered out loud. Traffic was no longer super heavy, and the person could easily pass me in the left lane. Suddenly the car began flashing their brights at me and honking. I was extremely confused. I turned off my podcast and kept a close eye in my rearview mirror. The person continued to flash their lights, half blinding me in the darkness, flooring it to the left lane. I maneuvered around a few cars, attempting to get away from whatever issue this person had. Except they followed my every move. Now, being a female in my early 20s, I began to feel sick to my stomach. And I listened to enough true crime and general horror stories to just be the right amount of paranoid. I had read on social media recently about girls from my school encountering sex traffickers in my town and along the interstate that runs through it. One of the town's papers had even ran a series of stories regarding multiple sex and human trafficking rings used around this interstate for capturing victims, because it basically runs the length of the entire country. I shook the disturbing thought out of my head and continued doing about 85 miles per hour in the right lane, unless I had to go around someone. The car continued to follow me, flashing its lights and barely letting themselves ever get more than a few cars behind. I finally took the exit to my university and looked back, and the car was still behind me. It seemed as though that this person was trying to get me to pull over. Is there something wrong with my car that I just can't see? I wondered silently. There was no way in hell I would be pulling over on the side of an interstate in the middle of a dark, rainy night. It's exactly how urban legends or teenage slasher movies start out. At this point, I had no idea what to do. Looking back, I really should have drove straight to the local police station, but I was too flustered and scared to even think straight. I tried to think back on the last hour or so of my drive. Had I cut anyone off? I don't think so. I'm a relatively good driver, and I tend to mind my own business on the road, not engaging in any road rage or anything stupid like that. So I stupidly began driving to my apartment. The car continued to follow, still flashing their lights every so often, but no longer honking. They continued to stay glued to my bumper, and that's when I started to panic. What if they followed me all the way home? The hell should I do? Call the police and send them on some wild goose chase to look for me in this car while I'm driving around town? As I approached another small exit off of a local highway onto a smaller street that ran past campus and toward my apartment, I had an idea. As I got closer to my exit, I did not get in the far right lane to turn off. At the very last second, I jerked the wheel and careened across the gravel shoulder so close to the grass that I barely missed driving off the road. As I gunned down the exit ramp, I glanced up at the overpass. The car had come to a screeching halt and was honking its horn manically. I broke down in tears for the rest of the way home, calling my boyfriend and explaining what had just happened. I never got a good enough look at the car to get a license plate number, or even really a good description of the vehicle, so I never reported the incident to the police. I have no idea what exactly was happening that night. My best guess is that whoever this person was, they saw me when traffic was stopped on the interstate, waiting for the emergency vehicles to clear the scene. It's very clear from the stickers that I have on my car, one being my university's name, and one that says Dog Mom, that it was likely that I was a college-aged female. All this person had to do was end up next to me to see that I was a female driving alone on the interstate in the middle of the night and have just the wrong intentions. When I was in high school, I lived in a very small town in Texas. It was the kind of place where everyone was either related to each other or hated each other. I had no family there, so yeah. I did have a pretty blonde girlfriend, and was pretty hated for that too. Nothing major, just some petty harassment and occasional fighting. But at the time things had been escalating. So that's why on Valentine's Day, my girlfriend and I decided to skip the school dance and just stay in and watch a movie at her house while her parents went out. It was just better to avoid any kind of trouble. We borrowed her dad's car, a little Honda hatchback, and went into town. We stopped at the video store, and afterwards we went to Dairy Queen and headed back to her house. Now, she lived in the boonies. It was out in the middle of the forest, along a lonely road, with no streetlights. We were chatting and eating our blizzards, when all of a sudden a car comes up behind us. No big deal. It became a big deal when the headlights flooded at the interior of our car, and I saw a pair of hands on the back seat, and the top of someone's head peering up from the hatchback. The lights had illuminated somebody hiding in the back of our car. As soon as the lights hit, the head and hands retreated back down. A solid chill ran through the entire length of my body. I slowly reached down and pulled out my pocket knife. It was the only thing I had. My girlfriend saw me and asked what was wrong. I then responded, "Nothing. I just had to stop at my friend's house real quick." She knew that was bullshit. I didn't have any friends. I pulled over at the next house that came up and jumped out of the car, yelling at her to do the same. She jumped out in total confusion. I flipped the driver's seat forward and lunged into the back seat in full maniac mode. The intruder popped up like a jack-in-a-box with empty hands waving. Hey, relax. What are y'all up to tonight? It was some weird kid from our high school who we had never spoken to before, ever. What in the holy are you doing in our car? I thought you guys were going to the dance. I was just hitching a ride. We sat there staring at him with our mouths open, wondering what to do. He tried to act real cool, and obviously we were in the middle of nowhere in some random person's driveway. We ended up driving him to the dance and dropping him off. The whole time he was telling us to come inside with him. Yeah, not happening. We dropped his ass off and sped out of there as fast as we could. When we got back to my girlfriend's house, she began crying and was shaking. She was completely freaked out. I still have no idea what he was planning on doing when the lights caught him crawling out of the hatchback. This happened a very long time ago, and thinking about it now still creeps me out. I lived in Adair County, Kentucky on a horse farm. One summer day about 5 or 6 years ago, my mother, who's the horse enthusiast in our family, found a new horse she wanted to purchase in Lawrenceburg. We'll refer to the seller of this horse as James. Lawrenceburg is one of several places throughout Kentucky where people have claimed to have seen Kentucky's version of Bigfoot, the hillbilly beast, which has been sighted all over the state of Kentucky. My brother and I were suckers for that kind of thing, like most kids are. We decided to tag along with my mother, hoping that we would see it ourselves. When we arrived in town, James's house was located on the outskirts, miles from anywhere. Only a few houses were dotted here and there on the sides of the road, but there was one in particular I will never forget. We were about 5 minutes away from James's house and going slow because we had a trailer hooked to the back of our 4Runner. I was staring out the window, hoping to see the hillbilly beast hiding somewhere in the woods, when I saw a house. This house had well over 20 mannequins throughout their yard, all shapes and sizes. Most were lying down or propped against what looked like a shed, but there were two among them that really freaked me out. One was an adult female, tied to a tree right next to the road, so close I could probably touch it if I rolled down the window and stuck my hand out. The second was the size of a baby. It was nailed to a tree only a couple yards away. Both of them looked really old and worn out, molding, rotting, etc. My mom stopped the vehicle, and we were all just sitting there staring at this place. The house was old and run down, but obviously, someone still lived there. The shed that was right next to it appeared almost brand new, minus what looked like satanic graffiti written all over it. The three of us were totally freaked out. We drove away, heading toward James's house. Once we got there, we asked him about the freaky mannequin place down the road. James claimed that he never saw anything like that. He also said that he was just in town that morning and took that exact road, so it's likely he would have seen it. Once we left with the new horse, we took a different way home, so we didn't have to look at the mannequin house again. Part of me thinks this could have been some freaky prank, but another part of me wonders, what if some of them weren't actually mannequins?